of growth that David had. Presence, communicative ability, direction, okay, positive approaches. I don't really hardly have words to tell you where this guy is going. He is so far ahead of all of the rest of us, it's just not even funny. Right now, well, David is working on a major musical, cosmic opera. Yeah. Now, this story is about an angelic being who actually was one of the creator beings that helped make Earth. But after Earth got made, he saw there was a little trouble because people weren't learning to love. And he decided to become human to see if he could help them solve the problems. Now, it kind of sounds to me like this might be a little bit of an allegory for David himself. You might not want me to say that, but I think maybe. Now, this is going to be available. It's going to have 25 songs. 25 songs. It's going to be available in mid-April, and David has agreed to play us a couple of them at the banquet tonight. I really and truly can't wait. But now what we're here to hear from today, okay? We're going to be hearing from one of the most brilliant minds alive today. I say that from my heart. I'm convinced of it. Planetary change, humanity's role. What the hell is going on? Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome David Wilcock.
Thank you. All right. Audio, test 1, 2. Testing, 1, 2, 3. Can everybody hear me? Hello? Test. Okay, so we're good. All right. No? Okay, test 1, 2, 3. Testing, 1, 2, 3. Audio, test 1, 2. There we go. Okay. Now we got some audio. All right. Bob asked me to play one of the songs off the album for you. For those of you who heard my recent appearance on Coast with George Norrie, we did play a little bit of this before, but not. You didn't hear the whole song. You only heard the beginning of it. So this might help to attract people back into the room as well, because we only have about half capacity right now, it looks like. So anyway, just to give you a primer on this part of the presentation, as Bob was saying, this is a story about an angelic being who volunteered to be human after having helped create the earth with a group of others, and then discovered that people were not learning the lessons of love. He goes through a whole range of human experiences once he comes here. That's what most of the album is about. And at this point, he's finally learned how to reconnect with his higher self and listen to that still small voice within. So we're going to start playing this, and hopefully it'll all work out. You guys ready in the back? Because here we go.
Listen to you. Ooh, you carry me through.
I'll just be singing.
Are you the one I met within my dream? So it seems a part of me, but something more. Listen to you. Ooh, you carry me through. Are you the one I hear within my mind, intertwined? I always hope you were there.
I played all these drums.
so true. What would you like me to do? Ooh, I listen to you, and you carry me through.
There you have it. I would have had it twice as loud as that, but that's my professional discernment. All right. So the guitar work and most of the instrumental work that you hear on that song were done by my colleague Larry Sire, who's a multiple Grammy-winning musician. And that really has kind of redefined for me my whole career in terms of what I'm doing here. So what we're going to talk about, the other thing is the first slide here, which we should now have up on the screen. This is the album cover, which we commissioned the art for that. And it's kind of supposed to indicate the pattern of humanity that's in the mind of the galaxy, with the two birds coming in to make the eyes here, kind of representing masculine and feminine, and this sort of DNA consciousness field that we're going to be talking about in today's talk. So, in order to get this part out of the way, because it's always been brought up in every conference, and I want to just say this, there is a similarity between myself and Edgar Casey, which extends through to the astrology, and I think Bob mentioned that. So what you can see here is a collection of the two charts together, and these are just some of the most gross similarities between the two charts. All the inner planets are in the same signs and within a few degrees of angle from one another. And for those of you who haven't seen the picture already, here's the photo comparison between myself and Edgar Casey. You can see there's a rather stunning resemblance there. So this is something I've known about since 1997, the end of 97, and it was very challenging for me to come out into the open with this. And in fact, the first time that I ever spoke publicly about this was here at this conference. However, I guess it was 2004 when we did that. And since that time, I really don't focus on it too much. We have a lot more to talk about today. I'd like to talk about how you're seeing this sudden push for disclosure in the mainstream media now. This is something that just came out recently. Look at the date. It's February the 15th, in which they're saying the galaxy has billions of Earths. So far, telescopes have been able to detect just over 300 planets, but they're now saying that there could be many Earths full of alien life. And so this is obviously, it's come out recently that this is where they're going. Another thing that I find very interesting here is a recent article that came out this year talking about how everyone who has blue eyes on the planet can be traced back to a single ancestor 10,000 years ago. And this gets into the idea of what some people like Bob Dean have been talking about regarding the notion that there are mixtures of ET races with human beings on this planet, and that, in fact, white people would be one example of a group that's not native to the planet, that's the result of interbreeding. So we're now seeing a scientific case we can make for that. Well, it would appear that there was a great deal of information imparted to our ancient world in the time of Atlantis, and they're even bragging about it, really, by putting this on the dollar bill, showing us a mystery that most of us do not understand, why the eye is there, what does this all mean. Novasaurus Seclorum actually comes from a prophecy talking about the coming of a golden age on Earth. The literal translation is New World Order, but the original prophecy describes something that is not like the typical negative government takeover thing that most people are now talking about. Also, you want to look at the fact that when the capstone returns to the pyramid goes from being a six-sided object with a bottom, top, and four sides to a five-sided object. And that 5 indicates perfection, whereas the 6 indicates imperfection. So there's a lot of symbolism being given in this image, and it's put right in front of you so that when nobody bothers to look to figure out what it means, it gives them another excuse to laugh at us and feel like we don't have enough knowledge to really even appreciate what's going on behind the scenes here. And of course, you're seeing now with the financial situation in the world, this movement towards a new world order, so to speak. They're trying to fast forward this whole thing, bring the nations together. And I wanted to share with you an interesting story back when I used to do intuitive readings, which I stopped in 2005, a woman contacted me at one point and said, "Well, David, I'm not really interested in the reading. I just wanted to help make a decision. Maybe you can help me make this decision." Okay. "Okay, here's the deal," she says. "Either I have attained enlightenment, in which case I just jump off a cliff like one of the Native American shamans would, because once you've attained enlightenment, there's no point in being human, or none of the stuff that I believe is really true, and I have no point in being here, and I should kill myself." I'm like, okay, so what you're saying is, should you kill yourself or should you kill yourself? That was the question. So, how this relates to what's going on now is that we're all dealing with a great deal of pressures, and there's a lot of things out there that are fearful that have brought us away from our center. And so one of the things that has made me such a popular speaker on the internet and why I got invited to do the last talk here is that I bring a consistently positive message to the things that are going on. So I would like to just put that on the table before we go through more slides and say that what you're going to hear in this talk is not doom and gloom, it's not fear and disaster. It's actually describing a scientific case where we can establish that all the changes that you see happening on the earth right now are actually pointing us in a positive direction rather than a negative direction. Well, thank you. I'm glad that was applause-worthy. That should be. So, how many people saw this Institute for Human Continuity website? If you're on MySpace all the time, which I am because that's how people can get to me sometimes. This was a website that was actually put out by Sony Pictures, and they're telling you, join the 2012 lottery. As if they're saying, you know, who's going to be saved from 2012. So it actually came out in the open in mainstream media that Sony Pictures was cashing in on 2012 fear. So you're seeing now it's becoming more and more mainstream. There's movies coming out about 2012. And in fact, the Dutch, where marijuana is legal, most people are getting paranoid about 2012. Maybe marijuana has something to do with that. Who knows? But there they are, and they're preparing for this apocalypse in 2012. Now, again, it's really easy to look at some earth changes and look at some things that would suggest that something difficult is happening on the planet. I'm not denying that. It's supposed to be scary right now. But it's scaring us not to death, it's scaring us to life. That's the point. We are being scared into an awakening so that we're shown that the way that we've been doing things will no longer work. And I'm really delighted to see movements being made in Congress right now to potentially tear down the Federal Reserve and get us back on Treasury notes instead of Federal Reserve notes. Thank God. Absolutely. Now, I'm going to deviate off course. It's going to seem that way, but you're going to see how this all ties together. Because we're going to talk about something that is the missing link. In all these ancient traditions, they have something called radiant mind energy, which is their top secret. All these Masonic traditions in which you're sitting there and they have the compass and square, right? You're drawing geometry. And those geometric sketches that you're making are intended to harmonize your consciousness with the universe. The reason why there's such secrecy and intrigue around these groups is that they believe that when you follow these Masonic practices, that you can become God where none exists. Okay? You're going to see in the course of this presentation that there is, in fact, an energy field that is the precursor to all levels of manifest reality on this planet. And when I say precursor, what I mean is it's underneath physical matter. Physical matter would not exist without the time field. Consciousness would not exist without the time field. Your mind is actually a time field phenomenon rather than something in the brain. Just look at the fact that you have a near-death experience, and you can see what's going on in the room, and this has been documented. There's many studies that have proven that people really have this experience where they're clinically brain dead, but they're over their body, and they still have a continuous perception, suggesting that your mind, your consciousness, is an energetic phenomenon that is only associated with the body, but is not reliant upon the body to exist. So, this gets really strange because the time field is what powers physical matter. It's what powers biology. It is the source of life. You've heard of these non-eating saints who can get by just by breathing and taking in sunlight, like HRM, that guy that does the sun gazing. And they've scientifically studied him and found out that, in fact, he does not need any food. He only drinks water, and he goes out in the sun, stares at the sun as it's setting every day, which is not recommended. It can burn your retinas if you don't work your way into it. I don't do it. But anyway, think about the idea now that the planets, as they go around the sun, are being driven by some sort of force. Now, most of the time we would say, oh, it's centrifugal force. But there's some reason why the planets keep going. And it's that movement of the planets that's ultimately responsible for wind currents on the Earth, which is ultimately responsible for why a tree gets blown over in the forest. So ultimately, the energy that is pushing the planet around, that pushes the wind, that makes the tree fall over, is the energy that powers time, the time field. Okay, this is a whole new way of thinking about reality. It's the idea that the energy that feeds matter, that's making these little atoms whirl around, is also affecting the rate of time. So, this was confirmed by some studies that were done by Dr. Wilbert Smith, who was a 1950s UFO researcher. We're going to talk a little bit about what happened there. In 1952, he was contacted as part of one of 12 different groups by radio telegraph, using a ham radio to get telegraph signals, kind of the primitive internet. And he was personally contacted, and a book was written about all this by Michelle Dobrinovich or George Hunt Williamson called The Saucer Speak. Now what happens is, this is not your typical contact like you'd read about on the net today, in which somebody says, oh, I woke up in the morning and I started to hear the voice of ETs. This is literally, go into the backyard. And they go into the backyard and there's a saucer sitting in the backyard. Because at this point in our history, ETs were still doing that. They've kind of gotten away from that because of the fact, ultimately, that it would pump up people's ego too much and make them feel special and different from other people. That was an unanticipated consequence, from what I've read. So they hid W.B. Smith's identity in this book, but that's the scientist they're referring to in the book. Now, the ETs explained that our solar system was moving into a more energized region of our galaxy. And that's a very, very fundamental point that you're going to see come back as we talk about 2012 here. This would create measurable increases in cosmic ray bombardment, and it would ultimately transform the entire solar system. Very important. They also said the message was given to world governments, but that the governments did not listen. Now, he said that there was a lot of information they got in the course of extensive contact that created reams and reams of written material, some of which we're going to see at the end a little bit. Much of the info cast serious doubts upon the validity of basic concepts of our science. They told us that time was a field function and that it differed as you go from one part of the universe to another. So again, time is what powers physical matter, and if you speed up the time field in a small area, time will actually travel faster in that area. So what this means is, if you sped up the time field right around this podium, then I might all of a sudden be frozen like this. And I would have no idea that anything had happened, except that all of a sudden everything here in the audience would go really fast, and I'd be like, what the hell is going on? But it'd be very slow for you guys. You just see me stuck like that. And if you remember the story of the Philadelphia experiment, this is exactly what happened. There were guys that were stuck, and they couldn't even move, and you had to rub their skin in order to wake them up back into our current field of time. So we're going to get into why this is important. They also said time could be altered, sometimes by intelligently controlled means in various parts of the universe. As you move around from one part of the universe to another, you encounter all sorts of values of time in certain given intervals. So what this is actually saying, this is a fundamental point, is that the density of time's passage is going up. Now, it doesn't appear that it's going up because we are inside the timeline. But there is a way that you can measure this as a spiritual being, because that's ultimately what this comes down to, is your spiritual progress. In other words, when I'm up here on the stage and my time starts going faster, you guys would see me as slow. But I would just start to see the room getting weird. But we're all on the earth going through this acceleration of time. The way you can measure it is this. You look at the duration between spiritually and emotionally provocative events in your life. That's how you measure that time is speeding up. How often are these crazy things happening to you that's kicking you to the next level of your spiritual development, whether you're ready for it or not? So when you see all these things happening with economic upheaval and you see all these spiritual events happening in your own life, some of which are very progressive, some of which are very destructive, depending on how much you're harmonizing with the energy of love, is what these teachings tell us, then you will be able to determine how well you're going along on this curriculum. Because the 2012 story is that we're all part of this divine creation. There's only one of us here. There's only one intelligent super universe creator. And we're only apparent separate beings. And when you tie all that stuff together, what you find is that we are all progressing back to that singular consciousness in the end, once again. It's all moving back in a direction where everybody gets to go home, everybody's a part of the one infinite creator. There's nothing in the universe outside the creator. That's what these esoteric teachings, like the ones we were talking about, tell you. So, it's important to also understand that the time field can be used technologically, and there's many different ways to do that. I'm just going to talk a little bit about someone who created a hyperdimensional information transfer, sort of like broadband. He's done this with cell phone calls, where you can actually call someone and use the time field to transmit the information rather than electromagnetic energy. And what that means is that if you are way off in another solar system and I make a call to you, it's a perfect connection because the time field is outside of space. The time field travels instantaneously, much faster than light speed, and it travels right through concrete and anything. So this works through shielding and any type of normal thing that would cut off a cell phone. So this is a write-up of the study that he did where he actually transmitted an entire 8 gigabyte hard drive from one computer to another. And here's the source where they were doing this transfer in Danube University. And here's the destination where the information was being picked up. And here's another write-up about it online. So you can see now this is the distance between those 2 points. This information was lossless. They got everything to go through perfectly. So there's a bigger, wider view of it. So they're trying to succeed and get data transmission rates of 16 bits per second, stabilize the connection. This would make it possible for us to have broadband everywhere. So the point is, the SETI people are looking for radio waves, but why would you want to put a signal out on light speed when it's so slow? If we start listening to the time field, if we start listening to what the Russians call torsion fields, then you'll actually find out that there's all these messages going on in the universe. And the way you can listen to it is by tuning in within yourself in meditation, because it's already there. So this solves all the basic problems of quantum mechanics. This is another important point. When you take single particles and shoot them through these two slits, they actually form 3 lines, and what we're seeing is one particle breaks in half, but then lands on all 3 of these places at the same time. And it's even been done where it will show up as 5 lines. Single particles strike in 5 different places. So obviously they're not particles. Obviously they're turning into a wave as they go through, kind of like this. So the way that we explain this, actually, is that subatomic particles are particles in our reality, but they're also spaced out in time in another reality. And they can flip-flop between the 2 realities. That's actually what's going on. When you see a wave, you're just seeing a particle smeared out in time. So if I smeared myself out in time the same way, and I walked from one side to the other, then you would literally just see this kind of hazy shadow as I walked across the stage. That's what we're talking about here. That's what's going on with quantum mechanics. Now, this has been proven to exist in objects larger than little electrons. This is a fullerene. You can see it's a molecule of 60 carbon atoms. And Zellinger in 1999 took these little 1 nanometer molecules, shot them through diffraction grating just like you saw, and got the interference pattern. So they take a single chunk, they shoot it through these 2 slits, and it breaks up into as many as 5 different lines. And it's a chunk, it's an object. So this starts to show you that there's something about physical matter that we haven't understood yet. There's something going on that allows matter to transmute. So here's the secret. It's the wave-particle duality. You see that physical matter is not so physical. And 1 nanometer is almost as big as DNA. So there could be quantum effects going on with our DNA as well. One of the ways you can see that is Kuznetsov, in which a sickened culture where there's a virus was energetically transmitted to a healthy culture of cells. just by allowing them to have optical contact with each other. So this is how, in many cases, diseases are transmitted. Now, again, if you want to protect yourself from this kind of thing, the key is the positive attitude, because this is a consciousness field in which the disease will not be allowed in unless for some reason you're inviting it in to help you grow spiritually. That we're living in a giant illusion, which is managed by these higher dimensional beings, as I've been told, and I believe there's a lot of compelling evidence to show that. So again, time in its own domain is a three-dimensional reality, and you can look this up, reciprocal system, and find out more about that. The idea here, like Einstein's fabric, you have space-time and then time-space on the other side of the fabric. And when the fabric curls over, that's where you form this gateway, just like these particles curl over into time-space and become waves. So we already were talking about this. You can move around 3 dimensions of space, but 1 dimension of time is fixed and moves forward like a river. 3 dimensions of time to us and 1 dimension of space to us over there. You can move around in time. This is the dream plane, the astral plane. Distance traveled over there equals time traveled over here. So what this means is this. If I popped into time-space right now in front of you, then I have 3 dimensions over there, which means you can't see me over here anymore, except maybe like a flickering light or something. But if I were to walk, if I simply walk, then as I travel through space, you guys are either going to be moving forward or backward in time. And if I stay still, then you guys are going to stay still. So it's like if you have one of those video recorders and you can back it up, back the tape up. If I walk backwards like this, then I'm going to see everybody going in reverse. If I walk forwards, it goes forward. Now, this is actually how, apparently, it really works. But the reason why we don't normally see that in the dream plane or in an astral experience is that this plane is inhabited with lots of forms of life who look normal and can talk to you and have everything going on. So when you have an out-of-body experience, there's a way in which you can go through all this stuff that is important. Now, the entry and exit points are very important because what this means is if you step in to the time field in one area and then you step out in another area, when you come back into our reality, that distance equals a time travel. So you have to go in and come out in the same place, or else you're going to have traveled in time in physical reality here. So, this is some of the foundation that helps you understand the time field and where we're going with that. Is this another ordinary time in our history? And I'm going to propose that it's not, obviously. Now, these are some of the cataclysmic earth changes we've been seeing, the fires recently in Australia. Koalas can be dangerous. I know it sounds silly, but koalas actually can scratch at you and bite you and stuff. And so here you're seeing this heartwarming picture in which the fireman is able to water the koala and help. So these challenges bring us together. They help us help each other. And that's a very important point. Is there some sort of divine being that we can explain scientifically? Well, this starts to end that divide that we've had between science and religion for so long. I'm going to show you a little bit about crop circles. I'm going to move through this quickly because I lost about 15 minutes of time playing you the song, which I hadn't planned on, and I know exactly how many seconds I have per slide here. So we're just going to zip through this, but let's talk about the fact that crop circles have been around since 815 AD. The Archbishop of Lyon wrote this paper in which he was accusing people of believing in cloud ships from Magonia that were flattening circles into the crops. And the people were trying to steal the crops in order to make pagan fertility rituals. Why? Because they had this really amazing energy that you could feel when you went in there. So in the 12th century, we see Middle English terms, elf ringewort, meaning a ring of daisies caused by elves dancing. This also suggests crop circles are historically something that we've seen over and over again. I found this on Wikipedia. This is an actual illustration of the fairies dancing and mowing down some grass, because that's what they believed was causing these crop circles. Now, in 1678, there was a story of a mowing devil, and this was actually published, and everybody got to read this, kind of like the newspaper of the time. The guy that came to mow the farmer's crop wanted too much money, and the farmer said, well, I'd rather have the devil mow my crops than you if you're going to ask me for that much money. That's ridiculous. Well, he wished he hadn't said that, because he goes to bed that night, and the whole entire field lights up with white light. And then the next day, he goes out there, and there's this perfect circular shape in the crops, so neatly mowed that no mortal man could have done it. And this is a drawing of it. You can see they probably had 2 circles in that formation. Now, here's a guy, Dr. Robert Plot, who in the 1600s actually cataloged crop formations that came down on the earth. Now, this was in the dawn of science, so they made a lot of mistakes. One of the things that he made a mistake about was that he found the hip bone from a dinosaur called a megalosaurus. But only the top of the hip bone existed. The rest had been broken off in the rocks. So he flipped it upside down, and to him it didn't look like a hip bone. It looked like something else. Now, granted, that would be quite a boner. But very fascinating what he did, because he's drawing these images of what he thought were wind currents, but in so doing, he documented crop formations like this spiral here and this pattern here, which is clearly not just a circle. And this one had a square in the middle. Now, his explanation is that, there was a square current of wind. Well, unfortunately, modern attempts to debunk crop circles is not a whole lot better than this, really. Another thing that's important is that there was this funky smell when he looked at the soil underneath the crop circles, but they had a whitish, like they were cooked. But the taste was insipid, and that means that, God only knows why he wanted to taste this thing that smells like moldy socks. But he did, and it didn't taste bad. Now, this correlates perfectly with Dr. Gil Levengood's observations in the mid-1990s of exactly the same thing. Whitish soil that looks like it's been baked. So we're seeing a consistency in this crop circle pattern. Here's an eyewitness saying that he saw a whirlwind touch the ground, form a circle, producing a sharp-edged circle 3 or 4 meters in diameter in only a couple seconds. This next witness in 1972 heard a noise, but the air was still. That means there's no wind to create this crop circle. And right in front of his very eyes, he sees this wheat being pushed down with no wind, unfolding like the opening of a lady's fan, and hearing a high-pitched hum. So you have an eyewitness report of a circle like this. Now, in the early days, in the 70s, it was just single circles. Then it became these circles with 4 patterns around them. As time went on, you start to see more and more of this kind of shape, which is an indication of the pagan goddess, the pregnant belly. Can everybody see that? Now, here's a much more modern, recent crop circle in which they're really reinforcing the goddess archetype. So, symbolically, this appears to mean that the earth itself, the earth mother, is pregnant with a new reality. That's this 2012 thing we're heading into. You're going to see a lot more examples of this. You can see 3 distinct goddess images here. The head and the stomach, the head and the stomach. Again, the same pattern. This showed up on a Led Zeppelin CD box set. And if you consider this famous circle everybody's seen, there's 3 goddesses here. They're just all sharing the same stomach, which appears to be a description of first dimension, second dimension, third dimension, popping into the fourth dimension here, showing the earth being transformed again. Sometimes people have meditated on a circle and it will appear. This was somebody said, what if we saw a Mandelbrot set and the very next day this showed up in the crops, suggesting that there is an intelligent force behind all this. This crop circle showed up in 15 minutes, and surveyors have said it would take 2 to 3 days to plan it out. This one again showed up the same year, very beautiful formation. And you can see all the implicit geometry in here, suggesting some sort of training we're getting in a new science, which we're going to talk a little more about. So people started to realize, hey, this is talking about fractals and things like chaos theory. And then the Koch snowflake shows up. And so all the skeptics are like, no, that's not the snowflake. That's not a Koch snowflake at all. The crop circle makers are like, okay, well, fine, we'll throw you a snowflake. They came back and did it again, put the snowflake in the middle, just to make the point. Now, this is amazing. This complexity obviously was an army of hedgehogs running round and round in circles, or Doug and Dave, who are all drunk and they're stamping the patterns down in the crops. This is clearly not anything that we could have done. When you look at these crop formations and you pull little grains out, as all of you probably know, there's bends in the crops which show that they've been microwave heated. Large amounts of water underneath the crops disappear, which appears to be used to inhibit the burning of the crops, because normally if you microwave crops, they're going to catch on fire. So large amounts of underground water disappear, and you see these amazing shapes. This is my favorite one of all time so far. Look at the intense geometry of that mandala. And this is clearly a message that's being sent to us, but it's in the classic way that the ETs like to work, which is to preserve our free will. If you don't want to believe in this stuff, you don't have to. They're not landing on the White House lawn saying, here we are. We're getting little tidbits, and if you want to pay attention, you can realize, okay, there is something going on. Now, We had a 2012 glyph that came out in 2005. We now know this was actually done by hoaxers. People went in there and found all these little blinking LED lights that were little machines in the crops. They didn't get the whole thing done the first time.